Morning, everyone. I hope you can hear this. This mic sounds like it's working. There are seats up here at the front, and we're going to get started very quickly because we have a lot to talk about. I want to give the speakers as much time as possible. So while you're making your way to a seat, let me just give a few announcements. Please silence all your electronic devices. There are seats up here. This session is being recorded, so if you have questions during the Q&A parts of this session, please come to a mic so that it can be recorded and people can hear it later. And with that, let me give an introduction to, this is Trimming the Cells, what you need to know about transformative agreements, and we have Colleen Campbell, Curtis Brundy, and Chris Bennett. So take it away.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making it in so early. I would like to start, the three of us will be presenting, and I'm just going to give you a very high-level introduction to transformative agreements, what they are. I mean, it's a new thing, right? We're in a moment of transition, and so, yeah, it's good to share information and get things a little clear. So I'm not going to talk about the motivation. I've done that in other presentations, the motivation around these transformative agreements toward open access. We're just going to talk about how they work. Transformative agreements, I'm from the Max Planck Digital Library. I coordinate the Open Access 2020 initiative. And one of our key strategies for transitioning scholarly journals from closed to open is the transformative agreement. A transformative agreement is one in which the money that was previously spent on subscriptions is repurposed to cover the costs of open access publishing. This is a really effective strategy for growing open access because you can work on the level of journal portfolios, right, instead of one single journal at a time or one article at a time. And also, the objective is to not pay twice for the same content, or that double-dipping phenomenon that you might know. So how do transformative agreements work? Well, let's step back a moment. In the past, in the print realm, we had individual subscriptions, and then when things went digital, we bundled these journals into a big deal package, right? Then we came into the era of open access. Funder mandates were demanding open access publication on the works that a result of the projects they were funding. And with that came the hybrid open access publishing option. So in order to publish an article open access in an otherwise subscription journal, authors were asked to pay a hybrid article processing charge. And what was the result of that? The result was, on one hand, we have libraries continuing to subscribe to journals, but at the same time, there was a second revenue stream generated on top of those subscriptions for open access publishing of articles in those same journals, the double dipping. So what are we trying to do now? We are trying to enact the open access transition, and transformative agreements are those agreements that bring these two revenue streams under one agreement, right? Hybrid APC charges were happening in the wild. Authors would pay them on their own, and there was no oversight, no control. So in the term under transformative agreements, the library or the consortium brings these two revenue streams under the control of one transformative agreement. Then what happens? Within that agreement, the money that was previously spent for reading access is now shifted to support open access publishing. So this is what our agreement looks like. Now, I want to say here, there is no one set model yet. We are experimenting many models. You might have heard of Publish and Read or Read and Publish. ACM has a new tiered model. So I think at this stage in the game, we shouldn't be too concerned about the nomenclature. We need to think about the models that will work for us all, publishers and libraries, that help us transition the money to open access publishing. The idea here is that as we move forward, the money invested will go solely to support open access publishing, and as more and more transformative agreements are negotiated, the need to pay for reading access goes down. In fact, just as an example, in the recent agreement we negotiated in Germany for Deal, the model actually puts the money at the article level, at the transaction of the article, which is really interesting because that will then allow us to free up those subscription funds that are currently locked in one big deal. The funds actually follow the authors and their articles. And that is something that's going to bring us into a world where funds are free to flow, following authors, not publishers necessarily. The costs are associated at the service levels and are transparent. We know exactly how much it costs to publish an open access article. With that transparency, we can get a little more pressure on the pricing, right, from our side, from the library side. And in an ideal world, move toward a world of post-payment rather than prepayment, right? Now we prepay our subscriptions, but if we're going to a world where we pay for services rendered, that moves to post-payment. That is more or less like a high-level view of the concept behind transformative agreements. Then, of course, as I mentioned, the models are all unique, and so we're still just exploring them. Here are some of the guidelines. I wanted to reference ESAC, which is an initiative that is a community of practice of those who are negotiating transformative agreements. So if you have any questions about them, here are references. You can get in touch with us, be part of this community. They are a transitional mechanism. They are not the new normal. The new normal that they are trying to achieve is exactly open access, right? They are about, again, open access, so authors retain the rights to their works. We're trying to achieve transparency in the costs. And of course, the transformative agreement says we move to a world where we're talking about a subscription package to a world that is based on the article. There are new workflows and processes that have to happen. And so the ESAC initiative also has recommendations on those workflows that referencing, how to identify our authors and their affiliation, acknowledging the funding, the metadata, invoicing, et cetera. ESAC also has a transformative agreement registry, so you can learn, it gives details about the agreements that have been negotiated so far, so you can go and look and understand the financial mechanisms of converting subscription spend to open access, and I invite you to go visit that resource. And finally, where do I start? Here are just some more references that could be useful. First of all, OA 2020, I invite you to look at the expression of interest and join us. Contact ESAC if you would like any information on how to even start on a strategy, because it's all based on data. That is your first step. And then Curtis here, who's part of the US OA 2020 working group, they would be very happy to talk with you as well about building a strategy of transformative agreements. And with that, I will turn things over to Curtis.
Does anyone have a question while they're transitioning? One question? Okay, then we'll go ahead.
Wonderful. Well, I think the attendance this morning kind of speaks to, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? I think the attendance in the room kind of speaks to the interest in this topic. I've been, my library signed on to OA 2020 like a year and a half ago, started working with Colleen and getting to know some of the Europeans that are making these agreements. And I feel like initial conversations, like in the US, going back even just to last year's Charleston, these topics were not getting the traction they're getting right now. I think all of us in this room have a sense that things really are moving right now. We have been in a static subscription, world for how long? And all of a sudden, just within the span of a couple of years, we're talking about doing things in a new way, which I have found, I told Chris when I saw him first thing this morning, that it's really quite exciting. So what I'm going to talk about, with 10 minutes to tackle like a practical aspect of these, so what are you going to talk about? You're leaving, 99% of everything out. I'm going to talk about these transformative agreements meeting my library and how we're thinking about them and some of the things that we have done to position ourselves to start experimenting with them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about principles and buy-in, and that's buy-in from our campus community. A few ideas about where to start. I'm going to show you where Iowa State is at, and maybe that'll give you some ideas where you might start on your own campus. And then I'm going to talk about cost shifting, and I'm going to talk about cost shifting, I think, in a different context, perhaps, than when Colleen and I talked about this. I'm going to talk about it in thinking about my library budget, how much money we're spending on subscriptions, and how we're going to actually make that money and coordinate that money going from paying subscriptions to paying for open access, because it's actually not that straightforward. Okay, so for principles, I think, we just had a couple announcements of principles just within the last couple weeks. So MIT announced their framework. At Iowa State, our faculty senate endorsed our negotiating principles. And what these principles are, the ones at Iowa State, just focus on how are we going to approach negotiations in this new world. We're doing new things. 3 years ago when we were renewing some of our subscription deals, I didn't need to talk about value. I didn't need to talk about principles on my campus because we've been doing the same thing so long, there really wasn't much to talk about. That's not the case right now. We're doing very different things with our money, and we're spending large amounts of money, and we're going to be spending even larger amounts of money in new ways. And in order to move forward with that, we really needed to explain what it is we're doing to our campus community. And we have done that through these principles. And I have told a couple people that I think actually the process of developing these principles is as important as what actually ends up on the piece of paper. Because the process is when you're having the conversation, it's when you're educating your community about what this new world is that you're trying to create and how you're going to be channeling this money, connecting it to mission, and all of those critical things that you need to do when you're setting out on doing something new. And on a panel yesterday, we had a society person with us, and it is exactly the same on the publisher side. If you are at a society, this is the conversation you need to be having with your board and your editors if you're going to be moving from the subscription model, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty around this. So if you can agree on the principles on what you're doing, it makes it a lot easier to do these things that come next. Okay, so here's where Iowa State is today. So we've got maybe three that I would put in this transformative category. And I'm starting to just say open access agreement because we get so confused on what it is we're talking about, and I'm done trying to define terms and having that debate. So these are all of Iowa State's sort of open access agreements. And so we've got some that exactly fit the mold that Colleen just talked about. We're going to be doing the tiered model with ACM. But we're also doing subscribe to open. We're also setting up institutional accounts with the pure OA publishers. So we're paying those APCs centrally out of the library budget. And I had a colleague ask me, well, Curtis, why are you paying for the PLOS APCs when obviously they're already getting paid elsewhere on your campus? And it's because I do not want to enter into an agreement like with the Royal Society of Chemistry. I mean, I did, and they're great, but I don't want to create an incentive where our authors they could publish in PLOS or they could publish in Royal Society of Chemistry, but because the library has this agreement, we're going to influence where they're submitting because we're covering the APCs there. So we're trying to keep a level playing field and not leave anybody out in our approach, and I think that's really critical. So as you're thinking about, from the library perspective, where you might start, look at who's active in the space. So de Gruyter's, Royal Society of Chemistry, Cambridge. I think Oxford's going to be coming out with something. There's a number of these that are coming, and if you're like me, you're probably starting to get people knocking on your door to talk to you about them. So the next thing I want to talk about is to get even more guidance on where you might start. You really do need to look at your data. And so we were fortunate a couple years ago that Matt Wilmot, who's here, worked with us to do some preliminary publishing analysis for our campus. He basically did a pay-it-forward analysis for us. And this was so informative. We had no idea what the publishing profile of our campus looked like until we did this work. And like a couple things just jumped out at me. Like we've got 5 publishers that account for 50% of the article output of my campus. We've got the top 20 account for 80%. So if you're thinking about where to start with these transformative agreements, getting a handle on what your publishing profile is huge. So if you're going to do the agreement with RSC, if you're going to do an agreement with AIP when they get theirs ready, how much is that actually moving the needle? It'll really give you, a way to kind of wrap your mind around things. And then the next step, I would say, is compare this to where your subscription dollars are flowing, right? How much time do I have?
4 minutes.
Oh, Great. Okay. All right, so I don't expect anybody to, look at these numbers, but this is basically the publishing numbers that are underneath that pie chart, right? So Elsevier is our top. This is 2017 data, so 365 articles with Elsevier. So what I did here, and I would recommend this, I do not have a sophisticated data analyst on my staff to really do the type of modeling and stuff that we need done. That's a nut we're trying to crack. We're going to try and work with some partner libraries in our consortia to maybe fund a joint position. But there's some very basic stuff you could do to model what this publishing stuff looks like and what moving to these open access agreements might look like in your library. So here's just a quick and dirty example. So I just plugged in, took those publishing numbers, and I put in a couple of APCs here. So a $2,500 APC and a $3,000 APC. And what does that look like? And I didn't put all my subscription prices on here because we're not supposed to do that. But zooming in here, here's our top 5. So we got Elsevier, IEEE, Springer Nature, Wiley, and American Chemical Society. And remember, this accounts for 50% of the publishing coming off of my campus. So when you look at these 5, something that's pretty interesting is that there's 2 on this list. And these are made up numbers. I could have put $5,000 in there. I could have put $7,000, and it would have changed this. But stay looking at the $3,000 column. So that brings Elsevier up to about 1.1 million. And ACS is at 291. Now, I will just say that there's 2 publishers on this list that are getting a significant amount more under the subscription paradigm. There's 2 that are getting significantly less, and there's 1 that's maybe coming in, if there is a sweet spot, maybe they're in the sweet spot. But you can see the difficulty in a finite library budget where you're trying to enter into these agreements where maybe your costs are going to go up, maybe your costs are going to go down, but at any particular point in time, what I'm realizing is we move from doing these smaller deals where it's in the tens of thousands and start considering doing deals out of a single library budget in the hundreds of thousands, maybe even in the low, we don't do millions, but maybe we'll have one agreement that's in the low millions. Having the money available to actually do all of this at the time you need to do it is difficult. And I will say every proposal I have gotten for one of these open access agreements, and every one that we have done so far, our costs have gone up. Not significantly, and a lot of times it's a lot of added value coming into it. So like our de Grooters agreement, we were only subscribing to, I don't know, maybe we had 40 individual titles. And our price went up by about 25%, but we went to the full package, and they're covering all of the articles. So there's added value there. But every single one of these agreements, the cost obviously can't go up. Somewhere there's got to be a little bit of give in the system where if it's going to go up here, then it's got to come down there. And I'm finding that's actually tricky. Because so far, everybody's happy to see the price go up, and nobody I've talked to has yet been happy to see the price go down. So backing up and summarizing, practical things that libraries can do right now to get moving in this space is, 1, get the buy-in of your community, whether that's through pursuing, negotiating principles, as MIT, and I should mention University of Washington has done this. A couple years ago, UNT put out a manifesto. I think it was more of an internal library document. But these really need to be external facing. This is your opportunity to have the conversation on your campus to explain what you're doing. OA 2020, that was a fantastic conversation on our campus when we took it forward, and we got an endorsement from our Faculty Senate Executive Board to sign on to OA 2020. And that was the first opportunity that we had to really talk about that we are ready to start to stop paying subscriptions and doing something different. And our faculty just looked at us like, they didn't know what we were talking about. Some of them still don't know what we're talking about, but we're working on it, and we're getting out and we're having the conversation, which I think is really, really helpful. And then get into your data. You really need to understand your publishing profile of your campus and think about what these decisions will make, down the road as you start entering into these agreements and how far your money's going to go and how far it may not go. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. Any questions while they swap speakers? Okay.
Good morning. You're all very quiet this morning. I hope you liven up when we have the general Q&A at the end. I'm Chris Bennett. I'm the Global Sales Director for Cambridge University Press. And what I'd like to do this morning is share with you our vision for the read and publish model that we think is our big strategic bet for the next few years to take us through into a completely different world where we are not operating even on the basis of having transferred subs money to this sort of read and publishing transition. We'd like to go beyond that to a non-APC based subscribe to publish model, but we're not there yet. We're taking small steps, and we started this a couple of years back when really we were nowhere as an OA publisher either. To give you some context, we have just over 400 journals in our collection, so I've always said that we don't really have a big deal. You can throw things at me later for that. But in general terms, we are more than half of that is HSS content, and 72% of it is society-owned content. So there are a number of conversations we knew we'd have to have with smaller HSS societies who couldn't see a future in this space, because if you've got a journal that costs only a few $100s a year to subscribe to, and the APC is 2,000, and you've built up a business around multiple subs to that journal over a period of time, you wonder how on earth, because you're low output as well, how on earth you're going to transition from one to the other. So not only did we need to give a compelling vision of the future to library partners around the world and say, work with us on this, we can make this together, but we had to say the same thing to our societies. And this is where we've got so far. Cambridge Core is our platform, 24,500 OA articles published. 80% of our journals list now accepts OA submissions, and we are working really hard at the moment on the remaining societies, and as of the last couple of weeks there are fewer than 40 titles who are not accepting OA as yet, and we think within the next few months they all will be, so we're lined up to make the transition. We're starting to flip journals. The initial success of Read and Publish and Pure Gold OA has seen us flip 6 journals for the coming year, and we're launching some more too, but only where we can really prove there's a need for scholarship in a new area, not simply to add to the glut of publishing, and that's a really important principle for us that I'll come back to. This is already slightly out of date. We've agreed 10 read and publish deals, and so far that's transitioned about 10% of our collection revenue. So we're on this road. We've got a long, long way to go yet, and our commitments, and those are commitments shared by our university, and it's also important to say we're a university press. The University of Cambridge and Cambridge University Press are committed to full open access as soon as it is possible for us to effect it. And it's a real transition, and there's been some cynicism about this. We are doing this to change our program. We are doing this because we do not wish to be branded a legacy publisher. We would like to offer value through service into the future, and we know that the business model has to change for us to be able to do just that. This has to be through partnership, and I'm really pleased to see the UC System Matt in here this morning. They've been a brilliant partner for us throughout this, and we've learned a lot together, and we've made some mistakes, some of which I'll come back onto, but California has been fantastic in getting into the nitty-gritty on this, and they and we, there's a whole table of Cambridge folk just over there, could you give us a wave? We would be really happy to talk as much as you like about the practicalities of doing this. We are committed to overall cost neutrality, another term around which there's a lot of cynicism at the moment, and rightly so. If it is the case that your current spend with us covers your publishing, we will transition you now, and we're already doing that. If that is not the case, then we need to work with you to get to the point where you can sustainably, and that means the margin, which I assure you is modest, and we will share that with you, that we take above the cost, can be carried forward into the future? How long will it take to get your publishing to that point? In the case of one consortium in the world, that's a 6-year agreement. We understand that it can take a while, and it's largely to do with, as Colleen mentioned, being able to centralise those funds in one place where, and UC have been really intelligent about this, where part of the money is being paid by the library system, part of the money is being paid through grant funding. We bring it all together and we try and keep the author workflow just as straightforward as we possibly can, because the last thing any of us wants is to make the author experience worse through this. And I think that's a really easy trap to fall into. We wish to be transparent on costs, as I've suggested, on our models and on our margin. And as we work with you, and what we'll do is map out your publishing with us now and into the future, and we'll talk exactly about what those things mean. And we are supportive of green archiving. With IOP Publishing and other publishers collectively represented by the Publishers Association in the UK, we've come up with something called the Institutional Archiving Agreement. It's a commitment to support green archiving, full manuscript in support of metadata into the IR. We haven't got rid of the concept of an embargo because publishers were unable to agree on exactly what that should be. I can tell you what it is for us. It's 0 for HSS, straight in, and 6 months for STM. This isn't changing. Oh, there we go. So we've mapped out a roadmap. We wish to be over 75% transition by 2025. And it means that the countries we publish in are represented graphically like this, and you can see this huge turquoise block closest to me here is the US. People in this room, your institutions represent the largest part of our publishing program. It's vital that we have this conversation with you. In the absence of a central mandate, we need to make this work. And I won't dwell on all of these, but there are some key points here I would like to pick out. We are covering research articles, review articles, and rapid communications in these deals, especially in humanities and social science publishing. There are several other publishing forms which are still really important to the communities who use them, but which are not in any way funded. And those, we think, for HSS are going to represent the read portion into the future. So as Colleen said, publish grows, and in our agreement with UC, publish grows by 10% per annum, read falls away by 5% per annum, but we don't see read disappearing for some communities, and it's important that we agree ways to continue to support it because of the ways they access and use that content and the ways it's created in the first place. It is obviously unlimited read rather than being tied into a particular package. It is unlimited inclusive OA publishing, and we favour CC BY licensing as standard. However, we understand that, again, in some communities, like historians, for instance, CC BY and ND particularly is a really important consideration, so we have left that to author choice. And authors should retain copyright. We haven't got this right yet. In some of our journals, that change hasn't happened, and again, it's something we're working with societies on. All of our journals that accept OA will be included, and this includes pure gold journals too. And where we need to, we will offer retrospective OA. We've needed to with UC because of when in the year we actually got to the point of agreeing and starting work, and the workflow, by the way, is painful. I will come on to this. So we had to say, okay, for the last 6 months or so, we're going to cover the articles that were published and make them OA retrospectively. We've got an even more challenging situation in the Netherlands at the moment. It was the first RMP deal we did. We did it in 2017. We honestly didn't know what we were doing. It was about an altruistic concept rather than a practical reality. And it's driven a lot more OA publishing, but not as much as their government mandate dictates. And there's still been a lot of traditional publishing through us through that period of time. And they're saying to us, well, what were you doing? And we said, well, nothing, but the author behaviour didn't change. It has to be up to both of us to incentivize our communities, our faculty, to get them to publish in this way and to make it easy for them to do so. And it's absolutely fundamental that we do that. But that goes to this point. The workflow is tortuous. These are just the communication points that we've identified where authors should be in touch with us or hear from us as the manuscript goes through the process. The payment system, and we're using RightsLink from CCC, the payment system should be as seamless as possible. But you've got multiple touch points throughout this process, and you have inefficiencies and poverty, particularly of historical data, and I think as publishers, we're all culpable here. We haven't been collecting corresponding author data in the way we could have because we didn't foresee this. It's now absolutely vital to collect that data and get it into the system, and for you to make it very clear to your authors what they're expected to do and how they ought to do it, without, as Curtis has said, impinging on academic freedom to publish how and where they want. So it's a delicate balance, and there will be a lot to do. We intend to partner with every library intending to do this, learn from each other, and share some of what we've learnt to date to help make this better. So on that point, engagement and motivation I've talked about. I think we'll need some truly new models over the next few years. We can move the shape of existing revenues at the moment. As Curtis said, we're going to have financial asks of some people in order to do that. Over time, there is going to be a settlement. But once we've reached it, I think we ought to be looking at a totally different way of doing things. We're using APCs because they give us a measure of the value of our publishing, but it's a flawed measure. And if you were expected to pay into the future on a one-for-one article for APC basis, we will just shift the problem of unsustainability to a different level. We will have achieved open access, and there are benefits to that beyond the business model that you're all aware of. But we won't change the problem of sustainability, and that's something we've really got to address. So we need to get to a point where we understand the value of a given article in the ecosystem, but we have one payment every year that supports all of your publishing without restriction, and that is it. And anybody who is not prepared to have that conversation simply wants to shift the existing model, not make the transition. There's a fundamental difference. We have, again, collectively, and many of the people in the room, like us, represent powerful Western universities. We have to take responsibility for supporting publishing from other parts of the world where there are not mechanisms to do that at the moment, and that's a big part of what we're doing. And I know that some of you are really committed to that too, which is fantastic. More than happy to talk more about that. There isn't time right now. And finally, work together on that new model as it starts to emerge from what we learn from this. Thank you.
That was very engaging and interesting. I hope that you all agree, and we're open for questions. Please do come to a mic, or if it's difficult, I can bring the mic to you. So I'll start with a question. As you are well aware, many papers have multiple authors, and I assume that one institution usually may be the one paying for that fee. So how is that calculated into the whole transformative agreement deals?
We're working with the corresponding author at the moment, and we are assuming that that author has control from a publishing point of view of the grant-funded element of this. That tends to be the case. Yeah. But yes, there's a potential for greater complexity there we'd like to avoid if we can.
And I will just add to that point about these corresponding authors. Not all publishers have really refined their systems in a way that this is like absolutely accurate. So just as an example of that, we have So you have to do author verification, right? The deals that we're in, we're notified when a paper has been accepted and that it's one of our authors. And then we are going in and having to check every single one of those, because on 2 occasions, we have been flagged to pay for articles from the University of Iowa, not from Iowa State University. And so there's room for that kind of confusion until we get, I don't know, like through ORCID or whatever, we refine the way that we're identifying these authors. There's a little bit of a complication there.
That's so funny. I actually was just joking on Twitter about initially associating you with the University of Iowa, which is actually a problem that I had in a bracket once in March, and it just totally busted my bracket. So my question, I have a couple of them, but first, how did you get your publisher profile? I know you mentioned it in passing. Like, how did you get a handle actually on where your researchers are publishing?
Yeah, so that pie chart I showed, that's Web of Science data. So we used their API, we pulled it all out, and then Matt worked with us from the CDL, and he's got a way to get at the corresponding authors, because those publishing numbers that I showed, that's not all articles coming out. Those are the corresponding authored articles, and that's the key point, because those are the ones that you're responsible for paying for. So you don't want to look at, where your author is number 9, because that's actually not your financial responsibility.
I just want to add, getting at that data is not easy, but I referenced ESAC, the ESAC initiative. They have this data analytics working group, and the folks there are working on putting together some recommendations on like sources that you could use, like some Scopus or Web of Science or whatever. So if you go to the site, register for their listserv, so when that comes out, we can share that information.
Awesome. And then in terms of who's managing that workflow around the APCs, is that your acquisition staff?
We're still dealing in, under 100 articles,
Okay.
a year. These are not big agreements for us. So I just have a real go-getter, scholarly communication librarian. She's really interested in all of this, but that is not where that work needs to live. So I think going into 2020, it will be somebody probably on the acquisition staff who's going to have to take on some of that. We still need to establish those workflows, rewrite that position to script, train. All of that will be happening in 2020 for us, is because we're going to be dealing with enough where I can't burden, this person who needs to be doing all these other things, like leading our OER initiatives.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is just an observation, I was really grateful to hear, the gentleman from Cambridge mention an N2 APCs, because that would be, I think, the ultimate solution.
So I'll ask another question. Yesterday in a session, Roger Schoenfeld mentioned that these sorts of transformative agreements do 2 things. They prop up the big deals and give value to the big deals, and they crown particular open access sources as ones that we're promoting. So do you have a response to those thoughts?
I think you already answered that.
What I would say to that is, our libraries have been paying subscriptions a really, really long time. How close did that get us to open access? And it is time to be experimenting and doing new things. We need to do all we can to avoid unintended consequences, yes. But these open access agreements have what got us to this point where the ground is shifting. Cambridge is doing what Cambridge is doing, and that's an exciting moment. We need to be cautious going forward, but I think any library that has, a 5-year plan to continue paying subscriptions, that's the plan I'm concerned about, not so much about what's going to happen with these OA agreements.
Kathleen Spring from Linfield College. This is, I guess, more on the logistics side of things. So from the author standpoint, I'm wondering a couple of things. What happens when you have authors who maybe submit an article when they're at one institution and then leave for another institution, sort of the logistics of how that works, and then also the fluctuality that you might have from year to year in terms of the number of articles with an individual publisher, how across various agreements, how do you sort of manage the up and down cyclical nature, or maybe it's not cyclical at all, across agreements such that your dollars are being allocated in a way that makes sense.
So we have to go with, just for simplicity, we have to go with where they were when they made that submission. On your second point here, we are working through that, and it's just one of those areas of imperfection currently where we're going to have to do better.
I would just like to add that my own library has been doing transformative agreements since 2016 now, and the importance of data analytics here. We studied our publishing trends for the past 5 years. 5 years of data was good to at least give us some idea of the trajectory of the publishing that was happening with a given publisher. And so that helps us, model for the future. But I think, one of the advantages, some of the agreements that we have right now is the fact that if we can associate the cost to the actual publishing, right? That's where we would like to go.
So I'm going to give her the mic to ask a question while I'll bring you the other mic.
Hi, Charlotte Lair from Lyricist. I've talked to all three of you about this, and I think Jason Price is in the room, so he might. Hi, Jason. So I want to talk about the read side, and I think this gets to getting beyond the APCs, because we keep talking about the onus on the published side. And I know there are a lot of the read institutions that do want to contribute, and trying to find a way to measure that, the share of that. And so when you're imagining 2, 3, 5 years from now, the stories you're gathering at this point about your own institution or those that you're talking to, how are we defining read? Is that changing as you're having your conversations?
I got something. Do you want to say something? Okay. Well, I think the point is open access is a benefit for everyone. So there are no losers in open access, right? Everybody wins with open access. And I think what we're starting to look at is how can we, in fact, define and quantify the value to the read institutions in open access. In a consortium, we've got a really good advantage. We've got a way of doing that. We're looking at new tools to track the usage of the open access content to and then be able to quantify that and then have conversation with the read institutions. Look, this is the value you're getting. Your users are accessing this content, they're doing things with it. So you should, yes, contribute to this overall system. Consortium models they're being looked at. We're testing them. We're trying to see what kind of cost allocation models would work. But yes, this is a question that needs to be addressed, and we're working on it, yeah.
Allocation that isn't just within consortia, but is across university systems, across funding systems, across geographies, potentially, is a solution here. So changing the way that the cost is broken out over time. Now, obviously, within one country and one funder, that's relatively simple, but we're getting to a point where we're going to have to look at this globally and get collaboration across systems and across funding networks. Researchers work internationally. Why can't we in building the infrastructure that this needs? And I think that's another answer to that question, fundamentally moving the money around in the course of this.
Chris Stewart, University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Where there are mandates in European countries, do you see any analog to that type of activity in the United States, and where do you think that will arise from?
Not at the moment, I have to say. I wish it were the case because it gives real impetus, and we've certainly seen that in Europe. But you'll forgive me for saying that you need the political climate to be on your side for that to happen.
I would just like to add, in my own country, in Germany, there is not an open access mandate, actually, and there is not central funding for open access. The deal agreements were made truly from the perspective of this is good for research, it's good for scholarship, and it's important from the perspective of the business model, because right now, under the subscription regime, we don't have transparency into the costs. So, the motivations were not because of a funder mandate. So I think if you look at things from this perspective, it makes it a little bit easier to think about.
Okay, we are at time, and in the interest, one more. Let me bring you a mic. But we'll need to close up after that so you can get to your next session.
I think it's building on Charlotte's question, what benefits could there be from READ? And I wanted to point out that I think Cambridge might have an answer to that, which I was excited to hear about and didn't know before I got here. But even though READ institutions don't publish a lot, they still need to showcase the research of their faculty and their institution. So if READ institutions can continue to pay for their big deals, where reading is less what they're paying for, they can gain deposit of those author-accepted manuscripts directly into shared institutional repositories. And largely, institutional repositories have not been successful in getting faculty publications in there. If these deals start to do that, then that's one possible way that READ institutions can benefit from the future. And so if you're building that, that's a huge thing.
And thank you. May I add to that on the theme of brand new business models? We've recently launched something called Cambridge Open Engage, which my colleague Bridget Schull, who is just there, is responsible for. And it started out as the preprint server for APSA, the American Political Science Association. But what we're building here is infrastructure for immediate, fast online publishing, which will assist READ institutions, it will assist early career researchers, it ultimately questions the value of the traditional IR in this space. It changes our emphasis as being a different kind of service provider again. And it's designed to be low cost, free at the sort of initial point of use with various levels of service. So that's something we're really keen to talk about, and it is a benefit for READ institutions, which adds to green archiving. I said we're supportive of, but we can't see a business model from that alone. There needs to be something else there.
All right, can I ask you all to help us thank our wonderful speakers and for a great presentation. Thank you to all who participated. And remember to complete the survey.